Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to another episode of Fan Team Radio. I am your host Shayem Khan, joined as always by my co-host Chris Odorizzi. Chris, what's up?
Yeah, Shayem, how's it going? Yeah, great day of Formula One. Um, Slightly uneventful, but it was still a good race nonetheless. Hungary's always a good showing. I wish it had been more of a wet race and seen some more Bottas bowling, but it is what it is. We got a good 70 laps today over a 4.3 kilometer track, which is 2.67 miles. And yeah, all in all, it's good to have a lot of Formula One in the month of July, and that Lewis Hamilton on pole was quite the sight by 0.003. I don't know if you watched the replay of sort of like the falling between Lewis and Max going around the track, and Lewis was actually almost a full car length ahead of Max by the last turn. And I guess he got a little squirrely at that last turn and he almost lost it, but was able just to eke that little margin out and put it on pole. But that was kind of awesome to see that guy happy again. And I know we were kind of hoping for some 2021 fireworks. That slowly disappeared. But we got a lot to talk about today. Crazy a lot of things have happened since just last race. Ultimately, the big news is Danny Rick is back. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say the writing wasn't on the walls. As you can recall, we closed our last episode by kind of shit talking DeVries a little bit. But, listen, in retrospect, everyone has their opinion about this. A lot of the drivers think that he didn't get the time that he deserved to be able to show out, and then a lot of the fans and people on the outside probably had were scrutinizing the hell out of him. Helmut Marko sided with the latter, and then they don't mince their words at Red Bull, and they don't they kind of stick to their executive orders, and it is what it is. So yeah, a lot to unpack. Let's actually get into that real quick, Chris. So in qualifying, we saw Danny Rick, the kind of anticipated star of this week's show, show out a little bit more than Yuki Tsunoda made his way into Q2. Let's talk about Danny Rick a little bit, Chris. What were your expectations coming into this, and how did he perform against them?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't quite sure. Danny has been, on both ends of the spectrum. Like he's a race winner at Red Bull, and he's a superstar of the game, demanding high salaries. And then, he's kind of been nowhere land, in a McLaren. And so it was one of those things where you got a lot of hype from people like Christian Horner and others saying like, oh, he was when he was testing the Red Bull that he was his lap time would have put him on the front row. And I was like, all right, don't get us too hyped up and excited because that's a big statement. But ultimately, yeah, I think he getting into Q2 in his first race driving arguably the worst car on the grid and outperforming Yuki, and then doing a decent job in the race after the turn one punt from Joe into the Alpines, and in keeping his place. So ultimately, like, yeah, I had tempered expectations because I feel like anything could happen, and I still am not 100% sure where he's going to end up in the shuffle, and whether he'll deserve the Red Bull seat again. But yeah, I think ultimately it was a decent, planting of the flag on his debut, saying, I'm back in the sport. I'm not as bad as DeVries, although not many are. So yeah, I enjoyed him back in the sport, but ultimately, like, unless AlphaTauri greatly improves or has a massive, shift, which we do know they will have new ownership, a new name, and a bunch of new design philosophies next year. Unless he gets that Red Bull seat, if he stays at AlphaTauri, we'll have to see whether he'll even have the wheels under him to compete.
Yeah, I think with Danny, the season was predicated mostly on Max winning and kind of not a whole lot of news other than, who might be vying for that P2, P3 position on any given week. So I think the media kind of hubbub around Danny and adding, adds an extra layer of kind of, I don't know if pressure is the right word to say, but it definitely does add some more spotlight than I think would have happened if the season was a little bit more competitive on track. But I think just kind of seeing the decision making that Danny has made since his departure from Red Bull, it hasn't always been the best. Some people could argue that he should have stayed at Renault. And try to see that program out, since they were on a slightly upward trajectory, but then switching to McLaren for that money grab, some people would say, because he wasn't able to perform in that car, especially against Lando Norris, and then kind of making his way back into the Red Bull Racing team, by ways of leaving the sport completely. I think Red Bull did something a little uncharacteristic here by allowing Danny a soft landing of sorts back into a more dignified kind of exit. But I heard a lot of thoughts on Danny, joining AlphaTauri only to be able to find himself a seat at Red Bull, and that's the only reason he did it, right? Like AlphaTauri isn't his future plan. It's definitely something that's interim, that he's gonna work as a springboard into the Red Bull team. The concern is that Checo, even though he has some heat on him, he isn't doing that bad, right? And it becomes even more complex when you see there's a whole stable of drivers in the Red Bull Junior, Academy. Liam Lawson being the front runner for that pack, and how Helmut Marko and I think Christian Horner both agreed that they didn't want to put Liam into a situation that was going to set him up for failure. Whereas Danny Ricciardo has some scars on him. He has the pedigree to be able to drive, but then is now in a relatively subdued position, where he could either have a stellar season and make his way into the driver 2 position at Red Bull, or he could kind of pedal where he is, keep getting these like P10, P11s, kind of placing just barely enough to beat Yuki. And it kind of leaves Red Bull in a similar position. Like, what do we do with these two drivers? If Danny and Yuki are just going to be competing in a very similar stance, with Danny doing probably slightly better, it might let you know that Yuki is not probably the driver to put into Red Bull. But I don't think it leaves them in any kind of solidified position to make a next, decision on who's gonna, quote unquote, take over Checo's seat. Right now, it seems like Checo still has the best hand on that seat out of all available drivers. So I'll see. I think there's still a lot that's left to be seen from Danny Ricciardo. Although today and for qualifying, him outdoing Yuki on both fronts, it does, I'm gonna there is some merit there, I think, but I'm gonna need to see it out a little bit more, to really make a decision one way or another, whether he's gonna be the Red Bull 2 driver, or if it's gonna be he's just gonna ride out the rest of his career in AlphaTauri as a more of a mentor.
Yeah, it's just the second seat at Red Bull was so weird to me because it's like the one seat that you can definitively say is not capable of being a first driver. Like Max is as much of like a leader on that team as anybody else in the system. Now I'm sure if Max like all of a sudden randomly started performing awfully, which is not realistic, that something would change, but Max has a really long-term contract. He's the highest paid driver in the sport, and like you have to go into that seat knowing that that's it. So in one instance you're like, these guys aren't up to the caliber of Max, so they don't deserve to be in the Red Bull seat, but that's what they want. Like they want someone that's can consistently finish on the podium or constantly getting points, but they don't want someone who's gonna, I don't think they want a Hamilton Rosberg situation where they're like taking each other out and they're fighting for wins and uh you know putting the championship away from Max. But so I don't know. I like you said, I think Checo's going to stay in that seat. I think Christian's already said that he's going to be in that seat next year. Of course, he did sign that 2-year extension at Monaco last year, so they would have to buy out his contract or whatever. So I always imagined Checo would stay through the end of next year, but unless something crazy happened. So I just don't know, like, is Danny gonna stay at AlphaTauri next year? Is he gonna leave again the sport if he doesn't get the Red Bull seat? We'll see. But ultimately, it's one race in. Even Nick had a great race at Mondo last year, so we'll see if Ricardo can improve and continually beat Tsunoda race after race. But ultimately, I'm not sure where his future lies, but we'll see. But
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, Chris. One thing I just want to expand on a little bit is Red Bull's tendency to have, these D2 drivers that you need to find the right profile of a D2 driver to fit in that Red Bull seat, knowing that Max is going to be the leading contender for them for the next X many years, right? I think that works either with, uh, someone like a Checo maybe that is okay with getting these like P2s, knowing that they're not going to get in a P1 position. But it kind of reminds me of Talladega Nights, the relationship between Ricky and Cal Naughton, and how even though Cal was okay with getting P2 and helping his buddy out, there was a certain point where he's like, hey man, like it'd be nice if I could just win once, right? And then Ricky's like, well, Cal, if you win, how am I gonna win? So there
yeah.
it's a funny, but I think it strikes a really true position with a lot of these drivers. Like you're right. If you're Charles Leclerc going into a D2 spot, it's just not going to be a good fit. It looks great on paper, but it's just going to be headbutting all the way along. I think Danny has now kind of gotten grounded down into a position where he really doesn't have any other choice but to humbly take the D2 position at Red Bull if it's there for his taking. I think what really would help Red Bull in the situation is to have someone young that's like almost like a George Russell that kind of came through the ranks in their program, and that's gonna be okay with taking a back seat to Max and learning from him, having the natural talent, kind of like what the Piastri situation's rolling out like in McLaren, and then that way Max can perform to his absolute abilities and be okay with it. The team doesn't have to deal with two different drivers that are kind of butting heads and trying to get that D1 spot. But then you also have a driver pipeline that you're developing thoroughly, and you have some credence and fortified pipelines for young drivers to come through your program. Right now, I think they broke that pipeline a bit with this Yuki Tsunoda, Danny Rick kind of snafu where they're kind of like it's almost like a bottleneck right now. So, and it's kind of keeping these other guys. I think they had a situation in years past with like Daniel Kvyat, and then obviously with Alex Albon and Pierre, where they brought them in, let them drive out a little bit and then immediately kick them out. It seemed like they had a fortune of riches in terms of their driver pipeline, and I think it's thinned out quite a bit now because they haven't really kept it up and kept that pipeline flowing. So I don't know. I think Red Bull's junior academy also needs to kind of maybe get another uplift in terms of how they're gonna like get them from that junior academy through their program into the Formula One seats, because at the end of the day they are they're sponsoring these guys for a lot of money. So I would think that they would keep an eye on getting drivers through that pipeline, and like they've done in the past with with Carlos Sainz and with Max, and they had a really good track record of doing that. But I think in recent years that's kind of fell to the wayside.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I think it's been hard for them because Max is so young when he started, and he's so dominant now. I mean, I forget what year in the sport he is, like year 7 or whatever it is, but
Yeah, they
he's
picked him up when he was 17.
yeah, he's only 24 or 25 now, and he's got a long future ahead of him. And so it's one of those things that it's like you don't have to think about, and they could delete Sergio's records from this year, and Max would be winning drivers and constructors on his own. So it's one of those things that you don't want that D1 competitor driver against Max, and so you take from these veterans, and like you said, it's hurting their junior program, but it's not like they have to be thinking about Max's replacement just quite yet. So it's kind of a hard solution to solve. But hey, man, Valtteri Bottas is always available, the best D2 driver in the sport. Put him in the seat, he'll win some races. But
He might just throw that sucker in reverse and fucking drive backwards. I don't
Hey
know, man.
man, the mullet would carry him around the track on their own. So
His
uh
attitude is so in contrast to Red Bull that it'd actually be the funniest Drive to Survive paddock probably ever.
yeah,
Um
yeah, let's talk about another D1 driver. Hamilton. After that quality performance, man, I was off my seat screaming, going crazy for the start, and by turn 3, he was in fourth. What happened to him?
Yeah, I mean, the car obviously did not come off the line as fast as he had no grip on the and also hats off to Piastri and Norris for taking that inside line, which is not the typical racing line for Hungary is where is on actually on the outside where Lewis started. So he actually had the most ideal position, but he did not have any grip coming off the line. He conceded the inside to Lando and to Oscar. So yeah, just a really sloppy, start of the race. He was trying to make up a lot of pace for it near the end. He was on hard the entire time. He was gaining on Piastri, overtook him at a certain point when Piastri boxed. And then had Checo on his backside after Checo boxed for like a ridiculous 1.9 second pit stop. Stupid. And then obviously Checo caught up to him, and then I think Lewis would have had a chance if they took him off the hards earlier than waiting until lap 50. Because he made some pace back at the end and almost was probably like half a lap to a full lap from gaining on Perez before the race ended. So it's hard. There's definitely a chance to get podium this week for Lewis. If the strategist were to pull him maybe a little bit earlier into the box to get on mediums, he definitely would have been able to kind of catch up to Checo, or at least made it super duper interesting near the end with one more DRS zone. But yeah, it was a tough race to watch for Lewis this week. I was super hyped on him getting P1 in qualifying, but then only to see George, I think, in P18 for qualifying, which was it was a when it all nets out for Mercedes is a fairly average week. With high up, a high upside in the beginning, but then it just probably a weekend to forget for Mercedes.
Yeah, I mean, this was the one time. Although we could talk about it a little more, but I want to see Max continue to break records just because this doesn't happen very often. But this was the one race where I was sort of like, if Hamilton, contacts, if there's a little contact and spins Hamilton Verstappen out turn one, or maybe gives him a little damage or whatever, like it is. It was the one race where I was just ready to watch like Hamilton versus McLaren, like for the win, and wanted to see that all over again. But within 3 turns, we were back to Max off into the sunset, and there was some decent racing, like you said at the end there, and I think Hamilton would have eventually overtaken Perez. He had a lot more pace at the end. Was I think in the last 3 laps, he was taking a second off of Perez, which is kind of crazy per lap. So that would have been nice to see Hamilton back on the podium, but we know the pace is there. We know McLaren now definitively has the pace. They've proven it back-to-back races. Both the one thing I didn't know until after the race from a tweet was that Oscar actually had damage on his car. They weren't exactly sure where it came from. They think maybe a curb strike or whatever, and I think that's why his pace suffered so much and why Checo and Hamilton were able to sort of catch him and pass him when the same wasn't true for Norris. So, that's why I think, Piastri has shown up fantastically ever since he's gotten those upgrades and proven to be the right decision by McLaren to push for that guy. But yeah, ultimately, kind of like you said, a day to forget for Mercedes. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of positives to take from these back-to-back races that we're going to have a Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes kind of mix up in there. And because of Sergio not being on Max's level, maybe a single Red Bull in that mix of fighting around too. So hopefully the last few races of the season will shake things up even more. Maybe Aston will bring some upgrades, and we'll get a little bit of back and forth from Alonso as well. But yeah, it was a decent race overall. I would like to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think Piastri held his own on this race. I think he's been showing sign. I mean, definitely showing signs of improvement, but also showing signs that the car itself is stable. Uh, the car is stable. The drivers are performing to its liking, and then the pit crew is also performing as pretty seamlessly. They were able to deliver a 2.0 second pit stop for Piastri, where him and Lando were both in the pits, and then Lando was able to kind of just come right out in front of Piastri, which I thought was an incredible part of the race. Had it not been for the 1.9 second marker that Red Bull set, I think that 2.0 second marker for Piastri was the best pit stop of the race. And then Piastri defends himself against Checo as Checo tries to overtake him in lap 47. Piastri did go off the as trying to defend aggressively, did go off the track a little bit into gravel. So I'm curious if that's the damage that you're referring to, Chris, or maybe it was earlier in the race. But he had a great race. It shows that the other side of what the De Vries reputation was, right? De Vries had a reputation of being like a Formula E champion. Was he a Formula 2 champion, Chris, or
Uh,
Formula 3?
Piastri.
Nick De Vries.
Yeah, De Vries won a Formula E. I think he won Formula 2 as well. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his he had, like, I guess, a pedigree of winning, and that that reputation probably is what got him his seat, as well as that uh the race last year where he was able to come in for Williams. But when I'm thinking about Piastri and kind of how he has been winning in all of his pre-formula races, it did give me a little bit of cause for concern. Is like, is he going to have the same kind of outcome as Nick? Especially when he was like kind of not in a great looking McLaren earlier in the year, when they just weren't hitting the performance marks. It was hard to tell if Piastri was going to be a dud, just like Nick was, even though they had a stellar background in winning in other Formula series. But that's not the case. Piastri is really showing that he's a legitimate racer in F1. He has what it takes. I mean, I also liked in one part of the race is I think his race engineer reached out to him. He's like, "Hey, did Checo like bump you or anything like that?" And Piastri was like, "No, he didn't really leave me any space, but and he left it at that. He didn't complain. He didn't do anything. So I guess it also kind of shows the level of maturity he's already at, I guess, mentally as a driver, and how he kind of reacts to stressful situations or situations where others might have felt like they've been done wrong. So yeah, all around great race for Piastri. Good looks for McLaren, and I think is more than just Piastri and Norris. I think the pit crew is doing everything right. I think the engineers are doing everything right. I think Zach Brown should probably take a little bit of credit for all this, and so I at least I bagged on him quite a bit early on in the season. But yeah, they've really turned the ship around, it seems like, and they'll probably be in that P2 position if Mercedes can't get some of these details kind of smoothened out on their end. I can definitely see it being Red Bull 1, McLaren 2, Mercedes 3 in the second half of this season. That's not to say I think that Mercedes will catch up in the constructors' points. I think there's too much of a delta there, and I don't think Mercedes is going to let the bag fall out underneath them. But in terms of just how the second half of the season is going to go, I don't think it's unfair to think that McLaren is going to pull out some P2s consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think the third spot in the constructors championship is probably their goal, at least getting to that fourth spot and taking Ferrari down. But I definitely think if Aston keeps performing the way that they are, and we keep seeing podiums from McLaren, that they could indeed take over that top three spot. Like you said, I think the delta is too big for Mercedes. Plus, Mercedes keeps putting up solid performances as well. But ultimately McLaren seems to be back. And like you said, kudos to Zach Brown. We both ragged on him pretty hard in the beginning of the year. Like, we had the silly chrome logos everywhere, tons of sponsors, and the car was shit. You know, even though they had decently good drivers, they weren't performing, and so it was one of those things like, what's going on? But hats off, man. They built a good car. Now they have a good, probably one of the best driver pairings on the grid, and it's going to be fun to watch them back.
Yeah, I mean, this I think is a good setup for a team that's completely opposite of them right now, but we're fighting for them preseason. Let's talk about Alpine real quick, Chris. Um, you know, terrible race for them right off the get-go. Joe Guan Yu runs into back of Danny Ricciardo. Danny Ricciardo runs right into, I believe I think it was Pierre Gasly, and then Pierre Gasly runs into Ocon, and then both the Alpines spin out and then are immediately declared out for the race. This all happens before lap 3. So uh let's walk through this, Chris. So last year, Alpine is in contention against Aston Martin and against McLaren for that P3 position, P4 position, sorry. With the with the thought that that Mercedes and Ferrari were going to be in P2. They lose their stud, rookie that they've been backing for years in Oscar Piastri. And Otmar is able to fill that in with Pierre Gasly, who I thought at the time was not, I thought it was a pretty good pickup given what they lost. Um, you know, Ocon comes in this year, gets one podium, but then everything surrounding that has been kind of crippling. And then I'm sure you'll talk a little bit more about Laurent Rossi there and him stepping away. But what, in a nutshell, do you think this race, Chris, is indicative of Alpine's season? Do you think it's just a string of bad luck that they'll get over? Do you think Otmar is he now, on the hook for any of this? What's your overall thought process about Alpine currently? And do you think that they have room for improving at the second half of the year?
Yeah, Alpine's a difficult one because, both of their drivers are what I would call solid drivers, but not anything above that. I mean, both of them have occasionally, had a podium or a race win in their careers, but uh, I wouldn't call them, either one of them like a D1. They're both kind of just a solid driver, can get the car around the track. And that's how I kind of feel about the team as well. Like, they're kind of a little all over the place. I'm not sure how I feel about Otmar. His persona on Drive to Survive kind of threw me off a little bit. He kind of seems like a squirrely guy, but I just don't feel like they have all their ducks in a row. I don't feel like they have everything figured out, and I think that's apparent with this leadership change that they have with Laurent going out and a new leader coming in. And I think they're just always trying to change the pieces around to sort of solve the puzzle. And I feel like they just need to like step back, create a long-term plan, and execute on that. Like, put somebody in charge that can organize the pieces, pick all the right people, put them in place, and start performing. They've always had a decent car. Like, Alonso was able to do some amazing things in that car. Obviously, Ocon won a race in that car, and there was a couple of the Bottas bowling took a bunch of people out in that race, and Alonso defended Hamilton like a madman, but still is a race winner. But yeah, it's just like today wasn't their fault, but at the same time, like they always seem to be kind of finding themselves in this situation because they're kind of in the middle of the pack, which is a dangerous place to be at the start. I just don't know how I feel about them. I think they're going to kind of stay where they are for the rest of the season, and I don't know what their plans will be for next year, but I feel like they're going to make a big change.
Yeah, I think kind of stepping a little bit back to that point I was making earlier about what ideal D2 driver looks like for the Red Bull seat. It's either someone who's really young in their pipeline with a lot of talent that they're going to be able to groom, and someone that could back up Max while he's being groomed to take over the D1 role, or it's someone who is a default D2 driver with some talent that is going to be in a better position as a D2 driver at Red Bull than they'd be as a D1 driver anywhere else. And I think Gasly and Ocon both fit that bill. I think what you had mentioned about them not either of them not being a D1 driver is completely correct. I don't see either of them carrying a team to a championship. But I definitely see them being able to collect a lot of points and being able to defend really well for someone like a Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc, right? I think I think Esteban has a higher likeliness of staying with the team than Pierre does. If hypothetically, if they were to kind of split the team up, I think they really rally around Esteban at Alpine. So I can see him staying there for a couple more years while they figure their stuff out. But they're looking for results rather quickly. So news this past week was that Rossi stepped down from the the CEO role at Alpine, and is now going to focus on special projects for the Renault group. And he's going to be replaced by Bruno Famin. Talk to me a little bit about Bruno. What's his background like, and why do you think that this is either going to be a good or bad decision forward for Alpine?
I don't know too much about Bruno, honestly. But hopefully, you know, the obvious joke is that hopefully Bruno famine will get them out of their famine. Like um, yeah, I mean, I think a leadership change is necessary. I know there's been some contention out there with Laurent Rossi and kind of the way he's been leading the team, but I definitely think that um they do need this change. So hopefully they're picking the right guy. Yeah, I don't know his background too much, but yeah, I think he was involved with the team in the engine program.
Yeah, so before coming to Alpine, he helped win Le Mans, the 908 project at Pikes Peak in 2013 with Sebastian Loeb. He helped win 3 Dakar races between 2016 and 2018, and the 2015 World Rally Car Championship. And then, in 2019, he became director of operations for the FIA. So the man knows, racing and various aspects of the sport. He has Jost Capito had a fairly similar kind of rally car racing background as well. So I don't know if they transfer over completely well into F1, is left to be seen. He definitely knows more than someone off the streets, right? But I think they needed something to happen. And I think Lauren Rossi had a little bit of heat on him after kind of dispelling the team publicly. I just don't think that was a great move, and it probably left a bad taste with the board. And this is me speculating, but usually when moves like this happen at a corporate level, it's because board members are not entirely happy, but they see the value in having someone like Lauren Rossi as a CEO from a business perspective. I think having someone that's a little bit more race focused, like Bruno looks like he is going to be maybe the shakeup that they need to be able to kind of get that car and that driver in sync to a point where they can start looking more like an Aston Martin or a McLaren. I still think there's a lot of meat on the bones for Alpine. I think they have a lot of good infrastructure. They have a lot of people on the team that seem like they can deliver a really good car. I don't think the car is where the problem is. I think it's these these driving issues that they keep running into, especially I think Pierre still has a bit of a hot head when it comes to driving
Definitely.
as a F1 driver, maybe not as hot as Yuki, but as we saw last week when him and Stroll went head to head a little bit, Pierre's reaction to that. And I think it's a matter of time before something happens between Esteban and Pierre that it just kind of starts flaring up old bad kind of feelings towards each other. So I can see it going down that way. Or I could see it where Bruno comes in week or two later, the team's performing really great. They're going into P6, P7 and consistently getting points. I think that's like the best case scenario for Alpine in the second half of the season is getting some P10 plus, positions consistently, given the car that they have. But yeah, ugly week for them this week. Can't really blame either of the drivers, given that it was kind of set off by a chain of events that was outside of their control. But if this was something that was the only race where they collapsed this season, then it might be forgivable. But in the scope of this whole season, where they've been really underperforming and having some flashes in the pan, but not really, it's a bit of a cause for concern for Alpine, especially seeing that McLaren and Aston Martin has kind of outpaced them.
Yeah, totally agree on all fronts. We'll see what happens with Alpine. Like you said, today was kind of not their fault, but we'll see if the shakeup. Like you said, I don't think the problem is the car, but they definitely need to get some things a little bit more right. And we'll see what happens with Mr. Otmar.
We shall see. So let us talk about our winners and losers in hot seat. Who you got for your winners this week, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, a big winner from this week is McLaren. Like a lot of talk from them last race, Silverstone, if that was sort of a flash in the pan, if their upgrades actually worked, if it was sort of a one-off with the right conditions on the track, temperatures, tire deg, and all that. But they kind of proved it. They proved that they're back. Lando back-to-back podiums, first time in his career. And Piastri, if he didn't have that little bit of damage wherever he got it from, maybe could have been a double podium. And I think we're going to see consistently them more at the front of the pack. And so I definitely think McLaren has kind of pulled off the Aston Martin effect from the beginning of the year, which was coming straight out of the gate. I mean, McLaren was basically nowhere at the start of the season, and then all of a sudden bring one set of upgrades and boom, they're almost there with Red Bull. Not quite, because Max won this race by like 33 seconds, but still they have a good car under them, and so I think this huge confident boost from the entire organization. Good pit stops today too, so I think they kind of they're checking all those boxes, and they're going to be a big contender for next year. So yeah, McLaren was a good one, and then Red Bull, it's just kind of a given that they're kind of on the winners list, but just wanted to highlight the fact that they broke the record for most consecutive wins as a team, 12 wins for Red Bull. No team has done that, and Max is well on his way, tied for the most number of wins in second with, I think, Schumacher, Rosberg, I forget the other two. I think Senna, can't remember the fourth, but and then the only person in sight ahead of him is Sebastian Vettel's 9-win streak, which, as long as no reliability things or crash happens, I don't foresee Max losing any races. So I think he's going to hit that 9 and potentially go to 10 or beyond, which will then very likely be an unbeatable record.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you with McLaren. They picked up 28 points between Lando and Oscar today. Just a super impressive race. At the start of the year, if you remember Zach Brown talking about how they didn't meet their performance metrics, and they kind of took it back to the lab and really made I don't want to say a risky investment, but it was definitely something that we didn't come to see, until this past 2 weeks, and especially when Norris first got his upgrades before Piastri did. I think that's one of the fun things about F1 is that you sometimes got to take them for their word for a little while. Like if they said that they do have upgrades coming, and the excitement of what an upgrade can do is, I think, as someone that again is trying to appreciate F1 for what it is, it's an engineering sport, and you want to find the most competitive races, or you don't want to see teams running away with it all the time. I think these package upgrades and the promise of them is something that's really exciting, right? So, and you can see it kind of just on display here with McLaren, especially, and then earlier on the season with Aston Martin, and like the rate of development this year has been incredibly fun to watch, and it allows you to kind of appreciate everyone outside of Max's dominance. So, yeah, I think McLaren had a really great race. I think Oscar is really showing himself out to be a mature driver, to be kind of the one of those like George Russell-esque like drivers. And yeah, I think the future of McLaren is looking pretty solid with those two on their roster. I'll also say, Red Bull is just firing on all cylinders right now. That pit stop, 1.9 seconds. I think that is the most impressive thing I saw all race. The inside move that Piastri made off the get go to get inside of Lewis coming out of the turn one, and then that 1.9 second pit stop that Red Bull did. So I think both teams are firing on as many cylinders as they can right now. So incredibly excited to see this become a tighter race near the P2, P3, P4 kind of scope. Let's talk about losers, Chris. Obviously, we talked about Alpine at some length. Who else do you have for losers? I think Leclerc having that 5 second penalty in the pits today kind of put him in my little loser bracket. But I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about Ferrari.
Yeah. I mean that I read up on that 5 second penalty, and it's one of those gray areas for me that it's like I'm I don't want to speak against it because we talked a lot about in the beginning of the season about following rules and the FAI being more consistent, which we haven't had to talk about in a while, which is good because they have been very strict about track limits and things like that. But then you see something like this with this 5 second penalty with for 0.7 kilometers an hour over the speed limit, and you're like, okay, is there any kind of degree of variance in there where it could be wrong? For under 1 kilometer an hour. But rules are rules, and 5 seconds seems harsh for something like that. I wish they were able to, dish out like 1 second or 2 second penalties for things that kind of maybe warranted. 5 seconds is a lot for, how much time are you gaining for going less than a kilometer above. But like we said, rules are rules, and it's just unfortunate day for Leclerc. He had that 9.1, I believe, the opposite of Red Bull's pit stop. He had a 9 second pit stop, and then the penalty, and there was that moment on the team radio where he was just completely frustrated with his engineers, with the strategy again. And I read a comment online that said because his like radio was like very muffled, hard to understand. And they were like, they totally had no idea what he was saying and were just giving generic Ferrari responses to like make him sound like they were like, we are checking, yes, we get it, we understand. And it's like I couldn't even understand what Charles was saying. So
Like,
I feel
Charles, what about Plan 7?
yeah,
Plan
Charles,
7?
plan Sierra, yeah, let's go. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I just feel bad for the guy. But ultimately Ferrari's Ferrari, and I'm guessing when you're in Ferrari, you're gonna always hang on to that hope that you're gonna have that Schumacher era-esque car and you can just dominate. But hopefully, I love Charles so much. I hope he can get out of this bad luck streak, but it just sort of keeps happening to him. So I agree with him on the losers. You know, I don't know if you saw the podium ceremony, but I got Max's trophy on there. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Lando
I think he did that
smashed.
on purpose. I think I dead ass think he did that on purpose.
It's possible, but I don't know if you saw the stats on those trophies, but my God, those things, they say it takes 6 months for those trophies to get made because they're handmade and they cost 40,000 euros each, which I was just like, if if you're one of the people that made those and you're watching the ceremony and you're like telling your family I made that, and all of a sudden you see this young kid smash his champagne on the ground, and topple the trophy over and break it. But it seems like the team took it in stride. They were taking pictures of it because they broke all the records today. They were like the record breaking trophy, which was
It's
kind
probably
of
if they've sutured that thing together with some like Elmer's glue, it'd probably be worth more money than any of those like trophies given out at Hungary ever.
it's like that Banksy the
Yeah.
Banksy print where they like shredded it live at the auction house as
Yeah,
soon as
and
it
it's
sold.
somehow like quintupled in value.
Exactly. Yeah, so sad day for the trophy and that value of it, but all in all, uh was a fun moment to watch and watch everybody at least be happy about it. But yeah, Alpine terrible day. Leclerc, Ferrari constantly. But yeah, who's on your hot seat today?
So hot seat, I wouldn't. I'd probably put him more in my losers panel than hot seat, but definitely towing that line. Yuki Tsunoda, coming in at P15 behind Daniel. It really is his worst case scenario this week is not being able to get into Q2 even in qualifying, which Daniel did, and then coming behind Daniel in P15. Chris, I think you mentioned earlier or not about Daniel being caught up in the potential Zhou Yu crash early on, and then making his way back to P13. So really great drive from him, all things considered. And even with that, Yuki, is 2 spots behind him. Like I mentioned, a lot of people talking about already. A big reason, one of the reasons, to bring Daniel into AlphaTauri was to have a more confident benchmark against Yuki's performance, since Nick just wasn't really any kind of benchmark. So I think now that they have a solid benchmark that they feel comfortable kind of assessing Yuki against and Yuki's progress, I think this was a really tough look for Yuki to come in 2 places behind Daniel, and then also under qualifying when it came to qualifying. So I think I would put Yuki in that, not the hot seat just yet, but I definitely think he's making his way there if this continues. I have Logan Sargent spinning out on lap 68. Just kind of the bag just fell from under him. He has some maturing to do, but since Albon is doing some really great stuff with that car, I think it's softening Logan's rookie season a little bit more. But hot seat for sure. I'm gonna put Otmar on my hot seat this week. Listen, I understand that today the snafu that happened with Alpine isn't Otmar's fault, but as you can see, the CEO has been replaced. There's only one other layer of leadership, and that's Otmar that the board can take a look at next. And I think what you mentioned about him kind of having that, the demeanor was a little bit more laissez-faire, I think is showing its weaknesses now, especially when the two teams that you're supposed to be up against, McLaren and Aston Martin, has made strides in their development. And they really, even with all of the bad luck stuff that could happen, even with Lance Stroll, remember breaking his wrist, they're still able to get performance and points out of their cars. I think Otmar is going to be the scapegoat for Alpine season if it goes sideways. Just like he'd be, the savior if they're able to kind of get themselves out of this muck. So I put Otmar in my hot seat this week. Not because of anything that he did directly, but maybe because of the things that he's not doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, whenever you have a big leadership change at the top, the first thing that leadership usually is going to do is change the leadership under him. Um, if anything, just because that wasn't his pick, it wasn't by their design, and so they're going to want to say, "Who do I want to lead the team?" And I think Otmar is on his last legs unless Alpine finds a way to come glaring out the last part of this year. I definitely think he's going to be gone at the end of the season, just from a sheer like making changes and shaking things up standpoint. Because the performance hasn't been there in the past. And like you said, he's going to be that scapegoat. For my hot seat, I got I got Logan Sargent just because with Nick DeVries gone and with Oscar Piastri performing so well, all the spotlight is massively on him as this rookie and what he's capable of. You have one rookie that performed so poorly that they were kicked out midseason, one rookie that uh is almost making podiums, and then there you go with Logan Sargent basically kind of in nowhere land, and retiring the car at the end of the race after a spin out with seemingly no reason other than just don't put another lap on the car. um and then he qualifies P20, so the spotlight is basically on him to say, like, are you improving? Because you got your Alex Albon, who's continually doing decently well in that car, putting it up there, almost getting points in every race. He finished P11 today, and
Did
Logan
great in
kind of,
qualifying.
yeah, great in qualifying. And then I fully understand not being on an Oscar Piastri's level, but it doesn't seem like the improvement race after race is happening. It doesn't seem like he's getting a feel for the car, occasionally fighting for points and stuff like that. He's just kind of in that bottom of the pack, can't really improve. So I think the spotlight is on him to sort of show the team that he is the right driver for next year. I know James Fowles has like encouraged him on social and saying like good job and stuff like that. So I'm curious whether he'll retain his seat next year just out of default and see and give that rookie like a 2-year trial period. Um, but I definitely think he needs to start performing, otherwise he's going to be out. And then I just wanted to highlight K Mag a little bit because I
Yeah,
feel like he's
just one thing on Logan, Chris. I think you make a good point. I was listening to the ESPN F1 show Unlapped a few weeks ago, and their host Katie George made a really good point that I don't think hasn't been said enough about. Logan Sargent is the American driver, right? When he was first taken on, it was with his big promise of having an American market that he can, that we can market him to, and have him be. So even if he didn't perform, to the stellar degree that Piastri is, at least he'd have some sort of backing as America's driver. He's not really anywhere on social media. He's not really hyping that part up about him, right? That it's almost in essence, Danny Ricciardo is still our American driver. We don't really consider Logan Sargent as our only American driver. And I think there's a part of F1 where likability matters a lot. Like, even let's take Danny Ricciardo out of it. Even Nico Hulkenberg is fairly likable. They keep bringing him back. He's a good driver. He went Ken Blonde for this week. Like, he's a there is a piece of likability that has to factor into an F1 driver. I think is a big reason why Nick DeVries was easily able to be kind of let go. Red Bull probably also, I mean, and this is again me speculating, Red Bull probably saw that he wasn't really helping anywhere in marketing. People weren't really gravitating towards him. So when he had a rough season, it was even more amplified by the fact that people just didn't really like him. And Logan, I think, is that it's not that people don't like him or have a distaste for him. It's just people don't really even know him, and if he's supposed to be the American driver here, why is he not, on campaigns going around the US? Like, why are they not bolstering him up more, right? So I think, there's the piece where Logan is just not performing on track. It's his rookie season, so I'm going to give him a little bit of leeway, but at least start building up that campaign around him that supports kind of this the brand of Logan Sargent and the American kind of like driver, right? There's not even that going on. So I wanted to throw that in there. I think it's a good point to make given how closely marketability and performance, and it's all tied into a team either keeping, or the decision making process behind a team keeping or letting go of a driver.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. You either need to be marketable, very likable, or you need to be good um in order to sort of like stay in the sport and be noticed and be out there. And like you said, yeah, the only time I remember that Logan Sargent is on the track is when they cut to him after him like getting out of the race.
Yeah.
um he's completely kind of in nowhere land. And yeah, that I wanted to bring that point up about K-Mag too. I mean, the guy just had another kid, and he always seems to be kind of in the back, and it's been publicly that they're, you know, keeping Nico, or they're interested in re-signing Nico. I can't remember if they have or not, but that, you know, K-Mag hasn't been yet, or they're maybe contemplating getting rid of him. And so I think, you know, Kevin didn't have a seat, and then was randomly back in the sport last minute. Um, and it's just one of those things where it just doesn't feel like he's kind of has that like determination, that drive, that fire, because like Nico continually outperforms him in qualifying. So we'll see what happens with K-Mag, but it kind of sounds like this might be his last year in the sport, as well. So just putting him on the hot seat to say like, I think he's reaching the end of his life. Just but yeah, I definitely think if you're kind of in that back of the pack, you need to start trying to make improvements, at least showing that initiative, that effort to want to improve. So yeah, we'll see what happens with Logan, with K-Meg.
Yeah.
Before we
So, anyone else on the hot seat for you, Chris?
yeah, no, those are my hot seats. I think um
I think I want to put one more person on my hot seat. So I think Nick DeVries, again, on my hot seat for this week. Just, I don't even know if he's handling retirement properly. Uh, there was a video where he pretty much bagged on himself. And I encourage everyone that hasn't seen it yet to go watch it. It's a AlphaTauri, one of those marketing like snippets on Twitter or Instagram that they post, where Nick DeVries, where Yuki's sitting in the back on the couch with his full AlphaTauri gear on, and Nick is like in his just like I guess like plain clothes, trying to like throw
oh, I
his
saw that.
jersey on him. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't stick, so he just walks off screen. Probably my most favorite Nick DeVries moment of all time. So if you haven't seen it yet, go look it up. He's bagging himself. Nick DeVries on my hot seat one more time.
Did you by the way, did you see that Toto Wolff basically came out and said like, I'll put Nick back on a reserve driver spot? Like Toto's just out there collecting,
All the misfits.
mediocre reserve drivers to have a horde of them for the future. So
I think he's
uh
sending Nutella Boy to go get his MBA also.
yeah. Cool. Before we get fully off track here, I wanted to get your thoughts on the qualifying format, because this was a huge shakeup, a lot of talk around it. It's the first time I think this has been done where um they forced everybody on Q3 uh to go on to hards, Q2 on the mediums, and Q1 for softs.
Uh,
And
no, I think it's opposite, Chris. I think it's Q1
oh,
hards, Q2 mediums, Q3 softs.
I totally just botched that completely. But yes, exactly what you said. So
Yeah, I
um
um, I really liked it. I think it did two things, right? I think one, it introduced a format that makes sense. Like if you want to you can save your tires, but then also test out every single one of those tires in qualifying, so you can see how each car kind of uh uh performs against those tires. There's a bit of a stock car component, right, where every single car has to have the same component for it. So that I think there's a part there that really helps. I think it also helps as they're switching from Pirelli to Bridgestone. And I'm not a big tire expert here. I'm kind of learning as I go along, but it'll probably give F1 a chance to showcase all of those Bridgestone tires against one another. It gives the audience an easier way to kind of track those tire usage, get a little bit more educated on those tires and what impact they have on a car and a race. And then also, the progression from hard, medium to softs. I think there's a cool aspect to where you earn, like your way into the fastest tires, right? Like when you're in Q3, like you earned your way to kind of probably set those fastest laps. So as qualifying goes on, as an audience, you can expect faster and faster times, which I think is a really great way to present present this kind of format, right? So I was a really big fan. I really liked it. I think it helped Lewis get into that Q1 position, where Mercedes probably doesn't do the best job at qualifying week in week out. So I was a big fan. I think they really struck something here with the new format. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I was not skeptical going in, but I was interested in sort of the outcome because the whole idea of qualifying is taking cars to their absolute limit and sometimes going slightly over that limit and doing some incredible things like that lap that never was, and with Max and Jeddah, and uh just putting that car on rails as much as possible. And to try to do that on like cold hard tires is a risky endeavor. I mean, I was kind of expecting the car, like there to be more spin outs, there to be more crashes, or something eventful happening, trying to put cars on the limit on hard tires. But ultimately, I enjoyed it. I think it gave us a little bit of a shakeup with maybe cars that are able to heat tires up a little faster and be a little bit better. Seeing a little bit better performance from some of the midfielders, like Danny getting into Q2. Maybe the AlphaTauri just heats up those tires a little bit better on the hards. So yeah, I think ultimately, like you said, um, adds a little bit of excitement to it. The times are getting faster. You're getting a little bit of a shakeup in the sport, and everyone kind of has to have the same strategy going into it with what kind of tires they're going to be using and how many tires they have available to them over the weekend. So ultimately, I think it was a good change that was completely unexpected. I mean, I think they intended to make this change at Imola. That race never happened, so I think it got delayed till now. So we only had a sample size of one, but I'm definitely interested to see what happens on this going forward. And speaking of going forward, we have another sprint race weekend coming up. We've had a lot of racing in July, and Spa's next week, so I'm excited about that. How about you?
Yeah, no, excited for Spa. It's one of the most dangerous tracks, but also one of the most fun. Just a quick note from Fernando in from past races, quote, you come into the corner downhill, have a sudden change of direction at the bottom, and then go very steep uphill. From the cockpit, you cannot see the exit as you come over the crest. You don't know where you will land. Is a crucial corner for the time lap and also in the race because you have a long uphill straight afterwards where you can lose a lot of time if you make a mistake. But it's also important corner for the driver's feelings and make a special impression every lap because you always have a compression in your body as you go through the bottom of the corner. It's very strange, but good fun as well. Uh, that is probably the best way to put that track, in my opinion, is dangerous. Visibility in those sharp corners isn't always the best, but you have to have that's why you walk the tracks as a driver and you do a lot of simulations, is that you should know it like the back of your hands. I'm super excited for it. Especially seeing how McLaren and Mercedes are coming up, how they're performing right now. I think it'll be a really fun race to watch.
Yeah, I mean, this, like, we just sadly lost the 18-year-old driver there a few weeks ago, and we've lost a few people on this track, especially in this turn. But it's one of the most iconic tracks in the sport. It's one of the first thing that comes to mind when you think about Formula One is El Rouge and Duradion, and in that long straight, and it's just, it's iconic. We've had a lot of big shunts there. Hopefully, I think the danger comes from like the drivers not respecting the flags and things like that. So hopefully we can find ways around that to improve people slowing down faster. But I'm excited. It's a great track. It's a great race. I think there will be some, remembrance when we're on the track for the people that have been lost as we do every year. But it's one of those races that I do hope never leaves the calendar. I know there's been some talk about that, but it's iconic. It's a great track, so I'm definitely excited for it. And it's a sprint race, so we'll get a lot of racing on it over the weekend. Um, but yeah, like, who your predictions?
Yeah, I think for this upcoming week, I got Max in P1, Norris in P2. And then I think kind of given how Sainz was performing today, even though he wasn't really able to pull out a podium or anywhere near podium, I think Sainz would be kind of battling for that third place, especially given the fact that they've been showing some good straight line speed. So toss up there. If it's not Sainz, I'll probably get Lewis Hamilton in there.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I mean, I'm never gonna not put Max on first until there's a reason otherwise. And I want Norris to continue a string of podiums. And I think without the damage on his car today, Piastri might have been able to secure that podium. So hopefully third time's a charm, and we'll get him standing on his first podium of his F1 career in his rookie year. And I kind of want to see that happen. So it's gonna be a good track for it. I think the car is fast in a straight line. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and put Piastri's there. Obviously, Mercedes is always a possibility as well, but I kind of want to see Oscar stand on the podium.
All right then. Well, we'll see what the outcome is at the end of next Sunday's race. Stay tuned for our thoughts after that race. Chris, anything else before we head out here?
Yeah, just slightly sad that we're gonna have kind of 4 weeks off, and I was excited about a little bit of silly season and having a little discussion about that. Unfortunately, we've already gotten DeVries out of the seat. Danny Rick's already back. We're already talking about Checo's been confirmed in the seat, so we'll see what kind of other big shakes-ups are left in the sport. But
yeah, maybe a silly season episode from us during the break.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it. But until then, we got another race before then. So let's enjoy it for what it is, and I think we're gonna have a good back half of the season going into it.
All right, all right.
Yep.
Well, with that, much love to everyone out there. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you after Belgium.
And we'll see you after Spa. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.